Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, and boy, do we have an episode for you today. I wasn't intending to talk about Quiet on Set. I wasn't even sure that I was going to watch it, but obviously this docuseries has gotten a lot of attention, and understandably so. For a lot of us that grew up in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of beloved shows are now tainted knowing that people like writer-producer Dan Schneider use these productions to their benefit, to be an authority figure in the worst way possible, to take advantage of what they could take advantage of in this situation. And unfortunately, it happened to be a lot of children. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that we don't even get into in this episode because there's just so much that was revealed. And I have a feeling that there's a lot more out there that people either aren't able to talk about or aren't willing to talk about. And that's, their prerogative. They don't have to be a part of the circus that this thing has become if they don't want to, if it's not part of their healing. But today we're going to be contrasting the experiences of Dan Schneider, who's been accused of being an abusive boss in a variety of ways over the years of running these kids' TV shows. And then we also talk about the astrology of Jeanette McCurdy, who is one of the many child performers that worked on a Dan Schneider show. And we talk about her as an example of somebody who had to deal with the reality of working for Dan Schneider and the reality of working in an industry that enabled his behavior and made him a very wealthy man. And so Dan Schneider is very wealthy, and meanwhile performers like Jeanette McCurdy and Drake Bell, and I'm sure others, have talked about how they don't even receive royalties for these beloved shows that they worked on for years of their lives. So in some ways, as shows like this replay, and they're not making any money off of it, they're continuing to be exploited. And obviously, the entertainment industry has a long way to go with ensuring the safety of their adult and child performers, because we've seen over and over and over, a lot of people have used the power dynamics in these work environments to take advantage of people and hurt people and traumatize people. And the victims don't necessarily always have a lot of recourse. And sometimes, many times, they're not sympathized with in the way that they should be. So I don't want to lose sight of the changes that need to happen in the entertainment industry, absolutely. But I want to point out that a lot of industries exploit their workers and exploit children. In fact, a lot of states are currently rolling back regulations for child workers. It's been an alarming trend that I've been keeping an eye on. And in fact, just today, I was reading an article about how the Missouri Senate is debating legislation that would roll back regulations for child workers. And as we see the prices of things going up and workers' pay just not being enough, who do you think that they're going to bring in to fill in those employment gaps? They're going to bring in prison labor, which a lot of companies already use. People are paid several cents an hour. It's a continuation of slavery, but that's a story for another podcast. But they're also looking to use children to fill these gaps in workers because they know that they can get away with more with kids. They already get away with a lot with us adults. But I just want you to think about that and keep that reality in mind, because I think it would be a shame if we fixated on, the sexy entertainment industry and the tabloids, and there's a lot of fanfare and attention around the entertainment industry, and I get it. I understand. It's a cultural thing. It's something that we all have in common to some degree. People like to relate over it. But there's a lot of exploitation and abuse that happens in our own families, in our workplaces, in our communities. So I think it would be a huge mistake to look at this story and just chalk it up to Hollyweird. And, there are rich, wealthy people exploiting other people in all kinds of industries. And then there are people that are a lot more regular, exploiting people that are a little bit lower on that power dynamic than they are. I'll just say a lot of the people that I personally know that have experienced childhood sexual abuse were abused by people in their own family, in their own neighborhood, family friends. So we have a lot of work to do culturally in respecting children, in protecting children. And when we put them in vulnerable positions like a workplace of any kind, I think we should all think about the implications on every level for children. Because oftentimes we're feeding them to this machine, and there are a lot of consequences to that. Today on the podcast, astrologers Mackenzie Wollenzine and Jennifer Russell join me for a conversation about Quiet on Set, the docuseries on Max that details abuses in the entertainment industry, specifically around Nickelodeon shows that were very popular in the 90s and early 2000s. After that, I take you through the astrology of that total solar eclipse happening on April 8th. I am very excited to have astrologers Mackenzie Wollenzine and Jennifer Russell back with me today to talk about the docuseries Quiet on Set. How are you guys doing today?
I'm good. I'm pretty good. Hanging in there.
And Jen, we have another podcast coming out. You're going to be able to hear us do more yapping together. What's going on, Jen?
Yeah, this is going to be more just like us talking conversationally like we do in our time off, just about, what's going on online, what people are yapping about. I wanted to talk on our first episode about the crazy stuff I've been seeing about the eclipse because people don't understand astronomy like at all, and that's a big part of astrology, and I get kind of my knickers in a twist about that. So we need to vent about what's going on,
Yeah, we need to untwist those knickers. Yeah, absolutely.
Come on.
Well, I'm excited to have another place to have astrological conversations with you guys because this is what we do in our free time. We just kind of clean it up and act right, on the recordings.
We be yapping.
We be yapping. So I'm excited for that, and of course to talk to you about this docuseries that we all watched, like many other people. It's been hugely popular, I think, because, obviously it involves our childhood, and that's something that we're all kind of deconstructing in some way or another at this point. So just a quick disclaimer, if you're not familiar with this docuseries Quiet on Set, it does detail a variety, a spectrum of types of abuse that happened primarily on Nickelodeon show sets in the 90s and early 2000s. So today's conversation, we will be mentioning incidents of abuse. We're not going to get too graphic with it, but just so people are aware that abuse will be part of the discussion today. Not going to be too graphic with it. If that, changes your decision, you are welcome to sit this one out. We won't hold it against you. There are some difficult subjects that are going to come up because of the nature of the conversation. And of course, if you are a regular listener of this podcast, you know that we have a strict policy. If you are hearing about placements that any of the people that we're discussing today have, that you also have, just know that that doesn't mean that you're just like them. That doesn't mean that anything that we are talking about today relates to you and your life. We try to discourage people from, jumping to those kinds of conclusions with astrology because it's really easy to do. It's really common. And that's just not really good astrology. It's not something that we want to encourage people to do, especially, when we're dealing with such serious subject matter. So that's our disclaimer for this episode. Do you guys know I could have been a child actor? As I was watching this, that was really, really blaring in my mind. And actually, when I spoke to my mom about it, that was the first thing that she said too, was like, this could have been you. Growing up in Los Angeles, there were multiple opportunities that I had. Like a friend of a friend was working on a project. They needed a kid for a commercial. I actually auditioned for a commercial when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. So around the age that people like Jeanette McCurdy and Drake Bell started acting was when I had my first opportunity. I really wish that I had the date for this audition because I do not remember it, but what I do remember is that they put me, in front of the camera to do a test. And I was a really well-behaved child and really like verbal and really articulate very, very early on, kind of freakishly. And So it should have been a breeze. I was a kid that sat in the back seat when my parents were driving around and would recite commercials word for word, just perform them. And I also have a South Node in in Leo. So I don't know past life wise, like what I've been told actually by a shaman that I did have a past life as a performer of some kind. And I'm not terribly surprised, like looking at my childhood. I did all the theater and stuff like that. So, the fact that I ended up in front of this audition situation kind of just tracks with all of that. And for whatever reason, in that moment, I just started like whacking myself on the head. Like I blew the audition, just completely just like had this moment where I just like flipped out. And it wasn't like an angry flip out, it was just like weird. And it was a thing that my family like laughed at me about because it was like, what was that? Blew the audition. And then as a teenager, as a young teenager, I got scouted. I did some other auditions and things like that. It wasn't like I didn't have stage parents or anything like that, so I didn't get too far, but I did have a stage grandparent, a double Leo we still have letters that she was writing to agents when I was very, very small, like an infant, trying to get me doing modeling. I was in beauty pageants and stuff as a small one. No makeup. That was a strict rule. They didn't put any makeup on me. I didn't have the fake teeth like little kids do. But anyways, long story short, I do feel like I was maybe spared from the pressure, the stress, the criticism that, little kids have to go through to be a child actor. It's a lot, as we saw in this documentary. So what was your guys' response to this docuseries?
I watched it all in one go. Like, I started watching the first episode. I'm like, I have to watch this whole thing because it was stuff that we kind of knew about because I've listened to some of the people that were on his shows that were child actors that, I enjoyed. They've been like on podcasts, or Jeanette McCurdy released her book. So I kind of had an idea. Like, it was kind of like people knew about it, but having it be this detailed and seeing exactly what was going on from people that worked on the sets and writers, it's like seeing all of the pieces come together and be like, this guy was just like asshole. I don't know how else to put that. Just an abusive, domineering, and so many awful stories.
Yeah, it was giving me the icky feelings. Just knowing that these kids went through what they went through and just like no one had any idea because of, that power dynamic between like these kids working for these adults and just these kids, not knowing what was going on really. And so it was just like really heartbreaking. And I found myself having to like keep pausing because I was just like in shock. And I had also read Jeanette McCurdy's book like recently. And so I was aware that there was stuff going on. And just from like, I'm sure I'd seen like TikToks earlier, like years before, and stories about like Amanda Bynes and just, there's like those conspiracy theories or whatever, but to have this like laid out very factually and eyewitness accounts, it was just like really awful and just didn't feel good to know that they went through that.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you guys watching this. Like, it was very disturbing, but I was not terribly surprised, which is sad to say. And I had no idea about the severity of what happened for sure. Like, the stuff that happened with Drake Bell and Brian Peck I certainly had no idea that that was going on, but the fact that it did happen, I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense, just the way that the industry is. And over the past few years, we've had a number of people come forward, since Me Too became a movement that people were generally aware of. I think a lot of people have come forward with allegations and accusations and a lot of abuses that have happened. People like Corey Feldman, have been talking about child sexual abuse in the industry. And, we've had people accuse like Bryan Singer but there's been definitely a lot of talk about this stuff. So the fact that it happened here, I was like, yeah, that would make sense. Especially, considering how many kids were, working on these shows, like so many children. Yeah, it was definitely very disturbing. And I was not super familiar with Dan Schneider. That was not like a name that I knew offhand. I feel like over the past few years with TikTok, I've seen mentions of him. And there's another actor from these shows that has been talking about Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon specifically for several years and has like a YouTube account that's pretty dedicated to it. So that was how I became familiar with Dan Schneider and the fact that he was somebody who, people were upset about. And, by my, limited observation, I was like, yeah, they probably have something to be upset about.
I heard about that when we were researching stuff for the Britney episode, because her
Mm.
name's Alexa Nicholas, and she had that story with her and Jamie Lynn Spears, like not getting along on set, or is like that like toxic environment that Dan was creating, like kind of, the kids were enacting that like with each other. And I guess Jamie Lynn had lied to Britney about something that Alexa supposedly done, and then Brittany was pregnant at the time and emotionally, volatile, and like screamed at her and made her cry. And when she went to go talk to someone about it, they were like, just suck it up. It was like Dan's whole environment on set like wasn't protecting these kids.
Yeah, and it's funny. It is funny that like this connects to Britney Spears in a certain way because of the Jamie Lynn Spears connection. And there's been a lot of theorizing online about, I've even seen people saying that they suspect that her baby is Dan Schneider's, like just stuff that we don't really have any verification for, that people are really reaching for and, putting together. I haven't seen so much like putting seemingly unrelated information together to make a story in a while, the way that I've seen with this docu-series, which is unfortunate because there's already so much that we know and that we have direct accounts for, that to make up outside stuff that we don't have any verification for seems really unnecessary to me and probably not helping the situation. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of people that Dan Schneider has upset, and rightfully so by all accounts, because this documentary talked about abuses just on a writer's room level. And if you're unfamiliar with the way that these shows typically work, every TV show has a showrunner who is essentially, like, I would say almost the CEO of any given production. So you're basically the head writer and head producer at the same time. And so a showrunner has an enormous amount of responsibility on any given TV show. And so the docuseries talked about how Dan Schneider had, employed women on his show. He essentially forced them to be writing partners, which writing partners in this industry are a thing, but those are relationships that are created organically and not by a showrunner saying, hey, I want to pay you to less than you should be paid, therefore I'm going to pair you together and now you're writing partners. That's not how that works. So, as a writer listening to this, I would, as a woman writer listening to this, like, I was just like, oh my God, there are challenges of being a woman writer in this industry, absolutely. But I think it was a lot worse at the time that this happened. And so the fact that this was allowed to happen is just kind of mind-blowing to me, because this is the kind of stuff that, were this to happen now, I'd be on the phone with my union in like 2 seconds. But, as the writer said, like, the risks to losing the job itself, and they were people that were younger writers, they had just kind of gotten their foot in the door. So there's an enormous amount of risk when you like report things like that, because it could be the last time that you work. It's like you're just getting in the door. So I really felt for the two women in this series who were talking about, like, not only the weird treatment that they received just day to day with, this guy making them massage his shoulders and, saying sexual things in the workplace, making them do really inappropriate things like moaning and like just saying weird stuff that he would email them just like because he could, that's the position that you're in when you're a showrunner. And I do think, I will just say, as somebody that's in this industry, and my work in this industry started in 2012, so a lot has happened between 2012 and when this all started. And also, every show is going to be a little bit different, and every network is going to be different and how they approach things like this. So I think I would say, just from my perspective, that I do think things have gotten better in this industry for the average worker. But all that to say, like, there is still a long way to go. The power dynamics are still very much there. But just hearing this story, just as a writer, I was like really, really bothered by it. And I really felt for them. I just really can't imagine that the position that they were put in and just like having to kind of suck it up, and then obviously the one woman that was let go turned around and sued over it. And he continued to work after that, and seemingly, continue to have these really disgusting environments. So it's just like this terrible situation where it's like, if you had treated the original abuse, like, would the other abuses that happen later have happened? Like, it could have been stopped earlier, which is the really disturbing part, I think, here. This man, because he was making them a lot of money, and this is something that I have personally witnessed in the industry, there will be these abusive figures, people that yell at their staffs, people that treat their staffs like shit. They're often white men that are in these positions. And because they're doing so well for everybody, there is a resistance to removing them, firing, like completely taking them out of the equation. They want to be able to keep that worker, in place and this asset. That's really what it is that Dan Schneider is an asset. And especially back then, why would they, remove this asset, this person that's making them all this money and success and building their network up? When I was very young, children's television was not what it has become. It was like Nickelodeon was really like the main spot. And then Disney kind of came up behind them, but it was really Nickelodeon was like, that's where a lot of the kids shows were that were like kind of cool and kind of different and progressive and doing something different. So there was a lot of incentive for Nickelodeon to make it work with him.
I think he began to feel like untouchable almost, and it's like he just got this big head and
Aries rising.
I know. Jupiter conjunct his ascendant.
So we do have a pretty good birth time for him. It may not be exactly right, but it was reported in a news report. That's the source. He was born on January 14th, 1964 at 10:54 a.m. in Memphis, Tennessee. So that makes him an Aries rising. He's a Capricorn sun and moon. He was actually born just before a new moon, which is interesting. And he also has a Capricorn Mercury, an Aquarius Mars, and an Aquarius Venus. I mean, it's just fascinating, like, looking at his chart. He's obviously somebody that very much knows how to wield authority. Like, him as a boss makes complete sense. I think looking at his chart, he's just somebody that I think is comfortable being in that position. And he certainly sounds so from this documentary. Sounds like he got really comfortable being in a position of authority. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Mackenzie. I'm sure, at the time that all of this was really going down, he was what? Less than 40? He's like, for him to be a showrunner and like doing this well and having multiple shows, this was just like, he made it, it's not only that he was in the industry and working, it was like, this is the dream that most people have, is to be in a showrunner position. That's a very common aspiration for a writer, is to like, I have my own show, I'm in charge. Like, you will just hear that's the goal for a lot of writers in this industry. So he had made it. Not only that, but, he had these staffs of people working under him. And, it's a lot of power. It's a lot of power. And then especially to have, like a lawsuit come at you and things like that, and to still retain that power, I would guess that would make somebody feel really powerful. What's fascinating to me is that at the time of our recording, Pluto has just gone over his Mars. So he is certainly having to change the way that he does things. And it remains to be seen exactly how that's going to play out. I know that he released his little video. I didn't watch it. I didn't really want to give it the attention or the view. I honestly don't give a shit what the guy has to say at this point. I just think that somebody at this level with this kind of information coming out, he's probably like, what I did see was clips of this, and he's like, there were a lot of people around. So he's like, I wasn't the only one that was there, and there are a lot of people, and, trying to diffuse some of the blame from himself, which I think is kind of a cop-out, because he knows damn well that as a showrunner, the buck kind of stops with you. You kind of set the tone. Because you have that power, you can set the tone of a set, because everybody's going to be looking at you at the end of the day. Because if you don't like something or don't want somebody there,
Mhm.
you have a massive amount of sway.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to piss the showrunner off. Like, duh. It's like, duh. And it sounds like, based on, the things that were said in this documentary, at least, that seemed to be a well-established fact. And we also got that, I found it very fascinating in Jeanette McCurdy's book, which came out, several years ago at this point, has nothing to do with this documentary,
Mm-hmm.
well before, and she never mentions his name, which I thought was fascinating. And I heard some people say that might have been for legal reasons, but it's very clear that it's about him because she's referring to the creator. She calls him the creator, which I thought was fucking fascinating because it's almost like saying God over and over in a
Yeah.
certain way.
I didn't get that.
The creator.
Yeah.
Oh, I was all on it. That's all she calls him. She never even says Dan in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the creator of iCarly. That's Dan Schneider. Like, it's, from my perspective, if it was a legal thing, you're identifying him even if you're not using his name. So I don't really feel like that was why.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't think that, lawyers comb over that stuff and,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want you to be sued for anything like that. So I'm sure that was all checked out, but she identifies him as the creator the whole time. The book is really not about Dan Schneider. It's about the other abuses that she suffered with her mother, who was like a stage mom and also just like a very controlling and abusive parent. What she does talk about is, very smartly, I think Jeanette really understood the dynamic on set, even though, she was literally a child when she started working on iCarly. It's just fascinating. We'll talk more about her chart as we go along, but she is a Leo rising and details her entire life growing up under this mother who she was emotionally responsible for and, would react to things with the goal of appeasing her mother, making her mother less upset or distressed or, a lot of responsivity to like adult emotions. So, a child that grows up in that kind of environment with that kind of, really adult dynamics happening and is able to pick up on it and feed into it is the perfect child to put on this set because they're going to be obedient. They're going to be reading the room. And that's exactly what Jeanette did because she's talking about how Dan Snyder's set, he would compliment her privately and say that she was enormously talented and that he wanted to do a spinoff with her and planted that seed so that she would have that goal in mind, in her opinion, and not rock the boat. And also she said that she suspected that he would tell other actors the same thing. And so that was kind of this private, like, oh, well, I can't disappoint Dan and I want to get that spinoff, and to try to motivate them to be compliant and being good kids. Yeah.
That was interesting because it did come up on the Quiet on Set that had started like from the very first show. Like that he was promising these kids like, oh, I'll do a spinoff with you. And then, it would like either wouldn't materialize or with some it would. And then it would continue to get worse and worse with his behavior as he got, more shows, more popular. I thought it was really interesting to hear from Jeanette about that period of time when he was like relegated to the back office and not allowed on set anymore because they didn't get to go into that on the documentary. So that was really fascinating because at that point like the hammer did start to kind of come down. It's like, okay, like enough, like people are noticing there's society has changed and we cannot do this anymore. But he's a guy that's become so successful with the way things were. So every time I would see his statements like on the screen about like whatever, like shifting the blame during the documentary, I'm like, I don't believe a word you say, sir. Like that's not what we just witnessed and what we're hearing from multiple other sources. Like that's not going to work anymore. And I think with Pluto going over his Mars, he's like really going to have to come to terms that nobody's buying his shit anymore.
Yeah, and well, so the fascinating thing is that Pluto will retrograde back over that Mars soon. And then it'll go back over. So the next like year, we're going to be, on Dan Schneider watch for multiple reasons. But these transits, keep an eye on. This man is going to be making some interesting moves, I'm sure. And then right now he's just got like a hell of a lot in his 12th house. And for him, for somebody that has a lot of secrets and a guilty conscience, that's not fun. So if that makes you guys feel any better, I don't think he's having a good time right now. And the sun just moved into his first house, so all eyes on him.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the timing of when Pluto had gone over his like moon and sun was around the time that that was all starting to come out, like the Me Too 2017, people talking about
Mm,
everything. And now I think it's like finally catching up where people are like, enough has come out that I think most people understand the dynamics that are at play and the power, like dynamics that force
Mm.
people to be compliant because this man will, literally control your livelihood if you're not, and
yeah.
especially for children that are taught to appease adults or just they're supporting their families. I think that was a big thing in a lot of kids, like from the very beginning in the documentary, on his first show. It's like this is their first job, their parents are like really excited, they don't know a lot about the industry, and then the parents that were more involved, those kids got pushed off and kicked off the show. So it was kind of like self-selecting these parents that are like pushing their kids to do more and aren't going to rock the boat, and the kids that won't do the same. And it's just like progresses throughout the years. There's so many examples and kids that are left in this man's wake, like deeply traumatized.
Yeah, I mean, because when you have these authoritarian figures that are in charge, the people that are going to stand up to them are probably not going to stick around because of that. Like, they're going to be pushed out because that person continues to be in a position of power. And it's fascinating that they did move him to his little, side room where he wasn't essentially allowed to be on set, which is wild to me as a showrunner to have that situation. Like, it's bad enough that the showrunner can't be on set and yet he's still employed. Is just, I don't know that that would fly today if there was any publicity around it, because you're admitting that this person is not fit to be on a set full of people. Sets are really busy places, generally speaking, yet he's still on your payroll. It's just like, what? You put him in a room so he's got his own monitor. It's just, that happens sometimes. Like, there is, like, on a set, you don't necessarily need to be like in the room that a scene is happening in to be like a director or a showrunner on the set, but like that's just a huge signal, like this is not a good situation. And yeah, and then they did the documentary did a very good job, I think, of articulating all of the things that were inserted into the show comedy wise that were, look, as somebody that was a kid, this was, all that Amanda show, all the things that he had a hand in at this time, those were shows that I grew up on. Like, I was a huge Amanda Bynes fan. I was, like I said, I could have been a child actor. I was so goofy and silly as a kid. So Amanda Bynes was like, that was like the final boss, in terms of like what was cool to me. So a lot of the weird humor that was on these shows, like that stuff, like kind of, worked for me in a certain way. Like, I was a weird kid, I don't know. And just like, it was just, I didn't register any of the inappropriateness of any of it because I was, a child.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't looking at, anything anybody was wearing and being like, those are penises draped around that kid's shoulders. Like, it didn't look like that to me. I just was like, this is so weird and goofy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, looking at it as an adult, it's like, oh, this is actually really creepy that like an adult man was like, if not writing this, approving it
Mm-hmm.
and putting these like almost like Easter eggs in these shows that as adults look at it, it's like, ugh, this is gross. Like, why is there a glory hole with like potatoes coming in and out of it? Like, that's weird.
Yes.
I'm just gonna say, like, looking at his chart, I'm not gonna, get into the why of it because, I do think that Dan Schneider has some weird
Yeah.
sensibilities. I do think that he, on a comedic level, I'm not surprised that he probably has a weird sense of humor. I will also say, I think he's got maybe a weird sexuality about him. I don't know what that means, and I'm not saying that it means that he has done anything illegal in that regard. But what I am saying is that I do think that there was probably more to these jokes than just like, haha, that's funny and kids will find this funny. Like, I do feel like looking at his chart, I'm like, I do feel like there's something like more to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they definitely. I know what you're talking about, but we're not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to detail things because the last thing I want is for people, again, to listen to this and try to paint other people with the same brush. And that's just not how it works. But I just want to validate what was
Mhm.
obvious in the documentary with the astrology from my perspective.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I can very clearly see why he's a terrible boss. Like, that's very
Yeah.
obvious.
Mhm.
And I think that got confirmed with that writer that said the character Penelope Taint, and they're, like, laughing
I
about
forgot
that
about
being her
that.
last name. Yeah, so and he's like, "Oh, don't say anything." And then they went to the
Hmm.
was it I don't know how that works. They go to
Yeah, usually, so like any kind of script that you're going to be submitting, you're going to submit the script to the network at some point because the network is the one writing the checks. So if they look at the script and they're like, we don't like this, we don't like this, there's a dialogue that happens between the writer's room and any network on every show. So there is an approvals process. There is often like disagreement in that process. Like as a creative person, the executives usually aren't the ones that like know, they don't, they're not always right. I will say that. And it's not that they don't have valuable input or that they won't bring up stuff that like, oh yeah, that, that should be adjusted or whatever it is. But 9 times out of 10, like non-creatives telling creative people what to do, I'm usually like, I don't know about that. So there is like an approval process. It's not like you can write a show and just have it exist and then the network just cuts the checks and doesn't ask questions. That's just not how it works. But yeah, so there were other people reading these and certainly approving, I'm sure.
yeah, and they submitted it, and then that person had asked, like, "Hey, does this mean taint? Does that mean body part? We think it does." And he said, "Oh no, that means it's tainted, like it's, not pure." And then the writer was like, "We knew that that wasn't what he meant, but, they just brushed over it and it was allowed to go through." He was making them a lot of money, so it's more convenient to just be like, "Okay, whatever."
He also said in the clips that I've seen of his little thing that he released to try to defend himself was that kids just have a weird sense of humor and blah blah blah, and then that is completely contradicted by what other people say and other conversations that were reported to have happened.
Mhm.
So I think he was very aware of what he was doing. Like I just don't see like like a well-grown adult man at this point not seeing that and finding it funny. Especially we know about like the sexual humor that he employed around his writers and in the office, which is also just like deeply uncomfortable as a worker to be in an environment where you're kind of forced to haha about like sexual shit and you're just trying to work and it's a child show. It's just like an even more like as an adult working on adult shows, that shit would not make me feel comfortable to
Mhm.
be in that workspace, let alone, back then on a kid's show. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's tricky because in a writer's room, I will say, like, you do talk about different things than you might at a different kind of workplace. Like, the conversation can get a lot broader. And sometimes, like, if you're talking on a show about that does have something sexual happening on it, you do have to have conversations about that. But I think there's very clear lines, and there's no reason that on a children's show that there was no reason to talk about anything sexual on a children's show. Like, there should be none of that happening. Incredibly disturbing. Looking at Dan's chart, I just feel like this is a person that I could really see my way the highway kind of thinking happening. Like I just don't see him being super receptive to criticism or maybe you should do things differently. Like I just see somebody that is very much about his own perspective. And I think that really kind of leads the way for him.
I just find it really interesting how he has unaspected Mars and Venus, except for that
Yeah,
conjunction with Saturn with the
right.
Venus, but it's really just running wild there.
Yeah, that Mars was like, huh? I would not want to deal with a 1 degree Aquarius Mars with authority issues.
Yeah, he seems like very intense, and I'm not surprised that he was, emotionally volatile and not able to handle himself. It seems like.
Yeah, I think he seems like somebody that would have just a really difficult time, like if he felt threatened or anything like that. Like I just feel that this is a guy that would just go on the defensive and would be inclined to self-protect, I think, above all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like if anybody's, all the parents that are questioning, they're like, okay, get him off. I don't even want
Mhm.
to deal with it, like, immediately. anytime I see an unaspected planet, I'm like side eye. Not in like a bad way. It's just like it's very prominent.
Yeah, it's noticeable. It's noticeable because there is no other energetic influence happening, really. It's very undiluted.
Running off leash, I would say. It doesn't have any
Yeah.
other planetary energies kind of
Yeah.
like influencing it. It's very Mars direct, and Aquarius can be kind of like high and mighty sometimes. So I'm not surprised that he is not like open to other people's input.
Well, and I also see that with that Aquarius energy too, he would be like, you guys can't
Yeah.
replace me easily. Like, nobody's going to have the ideas that I have. And to his credit, like, I will say that he was able to produce a lot of very funny things as a creative person. So I understand, like, the value that he brought to the table was that he was bringing these very,
It was kind of like forward.
the very
Yeah,
innovative.
he was very forward thinking. And I think the whole thing where he would post, like mini shorts or whatever on the website, or have the website like for the Amanda show, or like stuff for kids to interact and go online. That was like starting to just happen back then, like in the early 2000s, like the Disney websites and stuff. And like he was ahead of that, with putting the shows up there, having other ways for kids to interact. So I think with that, like Aquarius energy, he did see what was coming very clearly. And like, I don't know, I it's hard to like be complimentary of someone that's so disgusting, but like
Yeah.
he had good ideas. So I could see
Mhm.
why Nickelodeon was like, yeah, we don't have a guy to replace this. Like this is our guy, and we don't want to punish him because he's doing all of these things that are working.
I do think that he had a big hand in bringing children's television to what it is today because, again, at the time that he was starting to, have this trajectory of intense success that he had, he was ahead of the curve. Like, this was just not on every other channel. There was not the variety of content and avenues. Like, there was very few channels on TV at this point. We were a lot more limited in what we had access to, and nobody was doing it like Nickelodeon was doing. Even Disney shows had their own kind of flavor to them when they came around. But at this point, I mean, he was ahead of the curve. He was pushing the envelope, and so it's unfortunate that he had to taint it with his nasty, adult grown man fucking weirdness. Cause it was funny. I like, that's the fucking annoying
Mhm.
part, is that, like, as a kid, I was like, I was all about this shit. I was all about it. I was so into Amanda
Mhm.
Bynes. I thought she was like she was what I wanted to be at that age because she was so funny. She was full of life. She was so talented. And, it's unfortunate because obviously Amanda Bynes has had, a lot happen to her. A lot has changed. It's heartbreaking now to see her. And I sincerely hope that she is as happy and healthy as she can possibly be at this point. But it's very obvious that she's endured a lot of trauma. And, at a certain point years ago, she apparently was tweeting that she had an abortion at age 13 because a boss impregnated her. And people have pointed at that
Mhm.
as potentially, being Dan Schneider because of the age that she referenced on this, side Twitter account. So that's just something that she's alleged. I think that because of her mental health issues, it kind of depends who you talk to, who thinks that that is legitimate and valid, I guess. But I am inclined to listen to what she has to say because I think that when people have mental health issues, they tend to be discredited entirely. And I just don't think that that's like the right approach.
Yeah, and they had shown on the documentary that like people on the set of the Amanda show were like, Dan and Amanda spend a lot of time together alone. And
Yeah.
there was that scene where he was like in the hot tub with her that was just really
Disgusting.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. There's just like stuff that shouldn't have been happening. Like, why is this child in a bathing suit in the hot tub with this grown man that's her boss? And, yeah, she was reportedly alone with him in work environments regularly. So, there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot we probably will not know. But I do think that considering all that has come out, I do think that people have every right to be disturbed and really skeptical
Mhm.
about really anything that he has to say at this
Yeah.
point. So in this documentary, like there wasn't that much about Jeanette McCurdy in the documentary. She was on Dan Schneider's show iCarly, which was a huge success for Nickelodeon. My siblings are younger than me. That was like a show that they've seen every episode of. And so that's my relationship to that show. And I will just say, like, Jeanette McCurdy was always kind of the standout to me on that show. Like, I just feel like she had this warmth, and she's a very good performer. What about you guys? Were you guys iCarly fans? You guys are like the right age for it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was my favorite show. It was Drake and Josh, Zoe
Yeah.
101, and iCarly were like the big ones when I was a kid. So
Yeah, I just remember like Jeanette, she was always like the funny one. And I don't remember this, which is funny because in the book she talks about like how people would come up to her and like ask them to like hit her with a sock of butter. And I'm like, oh yeah, she did do that. So yeah, she was kind of like the funny one in the show. And I think it's good that she like has a comedic side. I think that probably helped her deal with a lot of the heaviness once she kind of like moved through it
Mm-hmm.
because obviously some of the things she went through were very not funny. So, yeah, her book was really good though. Just the way it was written.
Yeah, we read that book in preparation for this episode, or some of us reread it. It was my first time reading it. And this is a person that is from Orange County. She grew up in the town that my dad's from. So we should just say, so she was born on June 26, 1992 at 8:18 a.m. in Long Beach, California. So that makes her, she's a Cancer Sun, Cancer Venus, and Cancer Mercury. And then she's got a Taurus moon and Mars and a Leo rising. And it was so sad because, reading her book and you look at her chart, and if you're not super familiar with astrology, you might be like, oh, Leo rising, that's perfect for an actor. She actually quit acting not too long ago because she never really had the desire to be an actor, which broke my heart to think about that she, had this like career that started when she was like 5 or 6 years old, and it wasn't something that she even asked for.
yeah, that was really the whole book was really good, but it was very sad because really loved her as a child. Like she was easily
Oh,
my favorite character in iCarly, and I really, I could relate a lot to her, which is like interesting seeing our synastry. Like
right? Yeah.
hearing that her mom was such an influence on her life and like what she had to do, it makes a lot of sense seeing her chart, that her mom was such a domineering influence. And there's a lot of stuff that went on in that
Hmm.
book that I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, that we could do a whole episode just about this book. She's got a 10th house moon conjunct Mars, and it's intercepted, which is fascinating. Essentially, her mother wanted to be an actor, and because she was not able to do that, she thought that it would be a good idea to have her daughter, her only daughter, become an actor at a young age, and put her in acting classes, dance classes, started getting her out there. And she was a child that she described as very much wanting to, please her mom, which, like, doesn't every child want that? It was just so relatable in that way. She just wanted to make her mom happy. And
Especially with all of that cancer energy, like that mom being so important in
oh God,
family
yeah.
and taking care of everybody being so important. I just heard so much in her book that she was
Mhm.
responsible for like
Hmm.
managing everybody else's emotions, and she couldn't even like figure out what she felt. And she was, responsible for the
Yeah.
family's like financial success and like paying the rent. And that was just like
Mm.
no kid should have to feel like that. Like she knew when she was young, like I can't stop acting because that is how my family is. Like, yeah, not my mom is
Paying
like not
bills.
on the phone with creditors all the time and we're paying rent on time, so I have to keep doing these things even though I don't want to
Yeah.
because I'm taking care of everybody else.
It's unbelievable. Like, to imagine that level of responsibility as a child. It's funny because I do feel like there was this time where people were like, well, that's why men were drinking in the 50s because they had to raise their whole family. What about this kid who's financing her whole family's situation, And I think this is a story that we hear over and over in terms of young child actors there is a financial benefit for the family. And, these are often very working class families, or families that they're relying on this income to make their ends meet. And I just think it's really sad because, these are kids from economically vulnerable families. And then they just get into this machine of, it's a high level of control in those environments because productions are very expensive. They're so expensive. It's millions of dollars, you know what I mean? Like, so every minute that you're on set is costing you so much money. And that is something that, if you're in this industry, you are incredibly aware of because it drives everything. Everything. We think about it as writers because everything that you put on a piece of paper has to actually be built or shot, or everything costs money. And that's like, just like, that's how it works. So you have to get these kids that are really well trained, that can show up to a set, that they can do the job. It's an unnatural situation for adults to be in, and it's even more unnatural of a situation for children to be in. So you have to be a really impressive kid in many situations to be able to be successful in this industry just because of the demand on it. So, a working class kid is in an extra vulnerable position because it's not like they can just screw up and, quit if they don't feel like doing it anymore, or if they never felt like doing it, like Jeanette. So I just really feel for it. I personally, I have for a very long time questioned whether children should be in this industry at all. I honestly, my personal opinion is that we should really minimize the use of child performers completely, like if we can. I just really don't think it's a great environment for children. And I actually have a friend, her kid actually asked her to start, getting him into acting. And so there are situations where kids really want to do. I was one of those kids. I would have loved to be in the little TV. I would have loved it. That was why this was a scary watch for me, because I was like, I would have loved being here. And I would have loved to have a little job as a kid. I wanted a job so bad, my little cat moon. But, for a kid that is economically vulnerable, it just really made me feel for how many kids are in this position. And honestly, I really do think that if we want to address abuse as a culture, that we need to make it so that people are not in a position where they need to have enough money to survive, honestly, because that disincentivizes so many things. Like, families that are dealing with abuse, people can't leave because of financial situations, stuff like this, like people can't leave because they're in financial, situations. If you disincentivize, if somebody's, not thinking like, oh, well, what if my family ends up on the street, takes a lot of the power out of the equation. Poor Jeanette, her mother really wanted her to be an actor. She was in a position to be exploited in the way that she was. And she, her book is a really great case study of what these situations can be like. And, she does talk about Dan Schneider as the creator, as we mentioned, and talks a lot about the tone on set, that he was a boss that she was explicitly told wasn't somebody to upset. And there was discomfort. I remember the story that she told in the book was about where she was putting on bathing suits for iCarly, and it was dictated that it was supposed to be a bikini, and she was at an age where she was really uncomfortable with she's going through puberty, really uncomfortable with the way that her body was changing, and was not somebody that wanted to wear a two-piece bathing suit on television, and didn't even want to take the pictures, because when you are working in an acting setting, they will put the actors in the costumes, take some pictures, send it to the showrunner has to approve. So, this is a situation where you have to take a picture of this child in a bikini, and then you send it to Dan Schneider, and then he gets to approve the bikini or not. It's just creepy. And it's not like somebody sat down and was like, let's make this really creepy. But that's just how the approvals process happens on set. And so when it's a situation with a child in a bikini, that's creepy. There's a lot of opportunities for things to get creepy on these sets because of stuff like this. So I'm not sure why a grown man would dictate that a child needs to wear a bikini on a set, but because TikTok has been talking about this quite a lot, and I saw pictures of 90s Nickelodeon shows like Clarissa Explains It All. Somebody was showing all of the costuming on that, which the costuming was very 90s, very definitely not too revealing. It was just really it was cute, and it was also the kind of stuff that that stuff shows on TV, and then people start wanting to dress like that, because it's like cool TV outfits, and it was fun. Like, I remember that style being like cool to look at, right? And then as years went by, it just felt like children's shows
Mhm.
got a lot more like adult looking. Like, I never watched that show Victorious. That was very I'm way too old
Yeah.
for that. But just
Mhm.
seeing these pictures, like Ariana Grande in like heels, and like she looks like she's going to the club, but she's like on this Disney show. Like, it was just weird. I'm like, why? And so it does seem like that things have
Mhm.
trended that way, where these kids are like dressing a lot more like adults, and I think it's creepy. Like, it's just not. It could be like really fun, and it's not.
And there was that really uncomfortable, yeah, that really uncomfortable situation where it was all of those videos that were on the websites online that people necessarily wouldn't see on TV, but it was like more extreme, gross stuff, like putting her foot in her mouth, like squeezing a potato that was like very clearly like a sexual kind of thing, and like pouring water on herself. And it was just really like uncomfortable.
Really creepy. It was those were some of the most disturbing like things, and I'm like, I can't believe that this was on something that was for children. It's just like, it's not like, if you watch it and you can see how a child wouldn't really register. Like I was saying, like, I didn't register a lot of this stuff as a kid. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely very clear from her book that the stress of that workplace environment, and, the promises that he made to her privately, just this kind of sense of like who's in charge, was very
Mhm.
apparent from the way that she wrote about that experience, and how careful that she felt she had to be to not rock the boat, or, stay on his good side, because she did end up getting a spinoff out of the situation. And by the time that the spinoff comes around, she says that she was pretty much like over being an actor. I mean, she never really wanted to be an actor, so she was not that into it to begin with. But it sounds like by the time that she got her spinoff, that she was just like, I'm doing this because potentially, like, it will give me other opportunities. And in fact, she said that towards the end of the show, she was slated to direct an episode. And I really felt for her at this part, because I can completely see, like, this is a situation that makes total sense, I think, for somebody in this industry, because it's like, her having the opportunity to direct an episode it is a great opportunity for her, because it could have led to her being able to do more directing. And for her, somebody that didn't want to be an actor in the first place, that would have been a great like potential offshoot for her to, like, I don't want to do the acting anymore. I want to switch to directing. And then she, could have had like a whole different side of her career open up to her. And then so she said that she was about to start that process, and then come to find out, she like literally showed up on set and found out that she wasn't directing the episode, because her name was not in the director spot on the call sheet. They just said, you're not directing it, and it's just stuff changed. She said she basically broke down crying, and had to like leave the set, which is not something that she, sounds like to me from her book, that was not like something that she maybe ever did on set. Like, she sounded very professional, and then this was just kind of too much. She leaves the set, and then a producer ended up coming to check in on her, and according to her, the producer said, because she didn't understand why, like, why was she not being allowed to direct this episode. And she said, at this point, this was all I was hoping to get out of this stupid spinoff. She was like, I just wanted, to have this opportunity. And the producer said that somebody in the production had said that they didn't want her directing the episode. And in fact, if she did direct the episode, that they would have a major problem.
It's kind of like implied that it's Ariana Grande.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and she had talked about leading up to saying that all of the things Ariana was out doing, and that's kind of what people I think online were
Mm-hmm.
like speculating, because Ariana,
Mm,
this was like the time that Ariana was like
okay.
had her album come out. She was like on covers of like
That makes
magazines and
sense.
stuff, and she was having all of this success. And Jeanette was looking at
Mm,
that and it's like, okay, well, if I could just like
Mhm.
direct something, like move into that side of the industry, because even when she was little, she wanted to write. She wanted to do something else.
oh my God, that part kind of cracked me up, though, to be honest. She wrote a script, showed it to her mom, like all excited, little kid, I wrote a script. And her mom was like worried about it, because she was like, writers have watermelon asses and they dress frumpy. So as a writer, I had to pause, because I got hysterical. I was just cracking up and just thinking about my watermelon ass and my frumpy clothes. I was like, oh my God, Jeanette. I just really felt for her in that moment. I didn't register that Ariana
Yeah.
Grande was who she was pointing at. My first thought was that it
Mhm.
was potentially Dan Schneider.
Yeah, I think it would make sense if it was either of them. Or like
Yeah,
maybe Dan was like pitting Ariana against Jeanette. Like that I could totally see that
yeah, yeah,
because the whole thing with the show coming up is that
No.
Jeanette was kind of promised her own show and then they like shoved her and Ariana together to do this like combo show. I didn't watch it at that point. I was like, I'm over this. You could kind of tell, I think, like from the promotional material that Jeanette didn't want to fucking do this.
yeah. And I mean, she was just in a position where that's the really sad thing about it is that she was talking about like, she became an adult while she was on iCarly. And she was like, I could switch careers, but I don't have any education. Like she had nothing. And so a lot of these actors, like I think people have this perception that, if you're on TV or if you're famous or have some kind of following, that you're just like set for life. And I think people miss that the reality of these situations is, yeah, she might have made good money when she was, doing these shows, but I mean, one, child actors are limited. She describes that very beautifully in her book. Like, you're kind of like associated with that role forever in a lot of cases. It's very hard for adults that used to be child actors to kind of separate themselves from those situations. But not only that, she was literally like not qualified to do anything else because, she had been put in this situation by her family. Like she was disempowered, completely by her parents. It's a tragic situation because she was like, I don't know how to do anything else. Like, and she was just done. So, it's just sad because it's a really visible situation to be in. And then to also be vulnerable and hyper visible is just, I can see why it was so incredibly stressful for her. And I'm really just like glad that she
Mhm.
got a lot of counseling for the abuse that she endured by her mother, who was like maybe the one of the worst case scenario stage moms that you might think of. Got treatment for her substance abuse issues
Mhm.
and eating disorder issues and a lot of things that stemmed from her being in a high control situation both in her family and at work. So like I think it's a really I think it's just amazing that she did that and she prioritized that. And I also want to say, she wrote this book and I looked at some of the other things that she's been doing and it looks like she's done some short films that she's written and directed. And so she has kind of pursued the directorial path to some
Mhm.
degree, which I'm really glad that she did that even after that horrible experience. I would have lost my shit on that, to be honest. If that happened to me, I just like I can imagine that happening and I would have spun out the same way. So but she does have an aspected 12th house Mercury, which made me really excited for her because, as somebody that one, she's, a creative person, that 12th house Mercury, I think is beautiful for that. And for somebody that, has a talent for writing and expressing themselves, I was like, I really just hope that she continues putting
Mhm.
her ideas out and letting us, see what she wants to make and to share with us. Like that's my hope for her after all this stuff.
Yeah, I think especially now that she's, been working on her mental health and like understanding the things in her past, like that 12th house can really be once you're addressing those things, it like can rocket you into like your purpose or just something that's so fulfilling on the inside once you kind of like make space for that by getting out the old indoctrination or just the old behaviors that are like self-sabotaging. It was really really cool to hear her working with like through her therapist and like them having a very good relationship that she was able to conquer some of this. We see a lot of the child actors that were, especially on Dan Schneider's show, are not doing very well after.
Mhm.
It's just really cool to see someone that was able to work through all of that crap that was given to them. Even though,
Mm,
not her mess that she made, but kind of our responsibility to clean up in a way. It
yeah.
sucks, but
You're totally right. There are a lot of people that seemingly aren't doing as well as she is doing. So I think like in terms
Mhm.
of case studies for like a way to transform through with that, she's got a fourth house Pluto, and she was really disempowered in her childhood. It's intercepted. Really, really disempowered in her childhood completely, I would say. And looking at her fourth house now, what I would say is that she is using that horrific childhood trauma that she has and using it to empower herself, which is, a huge achievement for anybody. So I think that that's really, really cool. I also wanted to point out that she's got a 0 degree Cancer South node in that 11th house. To me, that is just very blatantly like my mother helped me achieve this audience, this huge audience that she has. She's somebody that was enormously popular, like when I mean, I'm sure she still is, gets recognized all the time when she goes out. Like she will probably always be recognizable in that way, and she's got her son there too. So I don't know that she's never ever going to be able to get away from it completely. However, we can see, she is somebody that can have an audience. She's got her North Node in that 5th house in Capricorn, of course. And from my perspective, she's really here to focus more on what she wants to make and also to be the boss of what she wants to make in some way, like not checking with mom about what we need to do. Like that is that North Node is like, I understand what I want to do and I'm going to prioritize what I'm building towards creatively and go with that instead of what everybody else wants me to do, which I love for her. I really do.
Yeah, I think having that book come out and talking about her childhood and all of these things that she experienced was really amazing. And it's really well done. Like, honestly, one of the better memoirs I've read because she is so funny. And even though it is a lot of very heavy subjects, it's still, she talks about with this levity. Like, she's just a very funny person.
That's hard to do. It's hard to do. And I think it's really necessary to do when you're talking about stuff that is so heavy. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I try to employ humor a lot on these episodes, especially where we are talking about things that are very serious. And it's not because I'm trying to downplay the seriousness, but sometimes that's just you need a little bit of levity when you're kind of swallowing all the bad stuff. A little sugar in there can help.
I feel like she's really done the work though, and like she continues to do the work. And I think writing this book was probably incredibly healing and difficult at the same time. But like it's out there, and I think her intention for like sharing and like being like really detailed with everything she did put in there was knowing that someone out there might resonate with just like a little bit of it and like help them in their healing process. And I just think that's really cool.
Very cool. And it's funny too because that North Node also makes me think about advocacy work that she could do for other children that are child actors, because we are seeing how disempowered child actors are in general. And we've talked about on this show before many times, children being disempowered in general, like even outside of, this industry. We don't give children a lot of respect or agency, and it often results in abuse and being taken advantage of, or just kids that maybe grow up into adults that aren't very comfortable expressing their needs or boundaries, because they haven't been allowed to have them. And so I could also see a situation where Jeanette might be somebody that could do some advocacy work around that and maybe be the voice for kids that don't have that opportunity because they're still children. But she's been through that experience and has a lot to say about it. So I wonder if maybe that will be something that comes up as part of her path as well.
Yeah, I think especially as it's becoming more in the public eye of how children are exploited in entertainment, not even just in TV, like online as well, people have been talking about it. Like her coming out with her story is just so powerful to see, like, it can really mess people up being in this industry and not having like protections in place. Just how her mom kind of just saw her as this like thing that
Oh
was
my
an
God,
extension of herself to be used. And like, she wasn't allowed to even have a different favorite color because her mom would like start
that's so
sobbing. Just
weird.
like, oh, she wanted a different ice cream flavor than she usually got. So she would start crying and she'd be like, oh, sorry, I'll do what you want. But yeah, it's like having these kids pretend to be something they're not when they're developing and trying to figure out who they are can just be so damaging. And, we see a lot of them turn to addictions or just like high control, like coping mechanisms.
Like disordered eating
Hmm.
or substance abuse. Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, we have a lot to say about this. So, we're going to continue this conversation over on my Patreon for sponsors of this podcast. We are going to talk about Drake Bell. It was somebody that came forward for this documentary to detail his childhood sexual abuse that occurred by an employee on the set of a show that he worked on as a child. So if you would like to continue this conversation with us, you can head over to Patreon, and that episode will be available there. If you're online and engaged in any kind of pseudo-spiritual spaces, you've probably heard a lot of fear-mongering about the total solar eclipse that we have on April 8th. The important thing to know is we actually have eclipses multiple times a year. So it's really not that uniquely significant, but people are really hyping this one up because we don't always have total solar eclipses. So that is significant. And this one is very visible in North America. If you live in a place that this is not visible, then this is essentially an extra powerful new moon. So it's only an eclipse for you if you live somewhere where it will be visible. And if you're interested in that, you can check out the path of the eclipse online. But there is a lot of fear-mongering around this. People stocking up like it's Y2K or whatever. And it's really just unnecessary. When we have an eclipse like this, what it signals is a time where we will almost certainly have big world events. Again, in places where it's visible. That does not mean that you personally need to freak out and stock up on dried beans and toilet paper or whatever, right? And if you're new here, I would encourage you to not buy into the fear-mongering because that's really just people who don't know what they're talking about, trying to get clicks and views and reel people into this cycle of fear and distress, because that's what people tend to engage with, right? It's not that hard. Like, as a content creator, I could be out here freaking people out and going viral on a regular basis, but I don't think that that is a good thing for the collective. I don't think that it is on brand for me and the type of astrology that I'm trying to do here, and I don't think it's good for the people that freak out. Because, like I say all the time, when we are in states of anxiety, fear, distress, we're a lot easier to take advantage of. And it's silly. We really need to own our agency and take responsibility for our energy and protect it and not let other people, especially random people, influence how we are feeling about any transit, any eclipse, whatever it is, whatever they're freaking you out about. So let's talk about how you can use this eclipse to your advantage. And if you're in an area where the eclipse is not visible, again, you're just treating this like a super new moon. So this all will apply to you as well. New moons are always a great time to set intentions, which means deciding what you want, what you're working towards, and what you're putting energy into, and being very clear about those intentions with yourself and with the universe. This eclipse is happening on April 8th at 11:20 a.m. Pacific time, and it's in the sign of Aries at 19 degrees and 24 minutes. So you're going to want to set intentions about how you want to use your individual energy. I've talked a lot about coming together as a collective, but the collective is made up of individuals. So how do you, as an individual, want to show up for yourself, for the people in your life, and for your wider community? What do you as an individual feel personally connected to? What skills do you have? What knowledge, expertise, experience can you bring to the table? It can be very easy to look around and be like, that person isn't doing this and they should be doing this, and it would be a lot better if more people did this. That can all be true, but this energy, you really want to focus on yourself. Keep your eyes on your own paper because you are running your own race. You don't have control over what other people are doing. What you do have control of is how you join with other people, when you join with other people, where you do that. So if you have ideas about maybe how you want to expand any kind of activities that you've been doing, how you want to maybe find people to partner with, to do whatever projects that you're working on, this is a good time to be very clear about those desires. It is going to be easy to be distracted by things outside in the world. And if you do not have any relationship to those things, or there's really nothing that you can do about them, it's really not the best use of your energy. This is really asking you to draw that energy in and really feel into what you are being pulled towards. Because the things that we do in the world are really an extension of who we are. So should they not be a reflection of who we are at our core and what we're here to do? So I think it's time to get serious and be very real and honest with yourself about what you need to move forward with and how you want to move forward. Things that are not truly authentic to you, they're really not going to work out so well, because I think over time with this energy, those things that aren't really truly for you are going to fall by the wayside. So don't worry about what people expect you to do, what other people think you should be doing. This is really a time to draw your energy inward, have some conversations with yourself, sit with yourself, reflect, feel into what's next. And you don't need to know where it's all going to end up. You don't need to know the whole plan. You don't need to have it all mapped out. But I think you do need to set up some really clear goalposts for yourself for the next 6 months. Because your energy, your impact, is yours alone. Now, of course, this eclipse is happening with Mercury retrograde. It's also conjunct that retrograde Mercury. So there may be some reassessing happening, some going back to the drawing board. If there are things that you've been trying to work on and they've not really felt right, it's okay to say, you know what, that wasn't for me. That wasn't the right move. Go back to the drawing board, tweak some things, make it more aligned, make it more you. Now, I'm a writer, so I always write out my intentions. And the reason I do that is so that I can look back on them about 6 months out and see what's come to fruition, what has manifested in my life. And if you don't write it down, if you don't document it in some way, it's very hard to revisit because you'll probably forget that you even sent the intentions in the first place. Every single month, I host a new moon manifesting circle. And this month, we're meeting on April 7th at 4 p.m. Pacific time on Zoom. And I walk you through the energy of this eclipse, this new moon, and I show you how to make your intentions more specific based on where this new moon is happening in your astrology chart. And we do it as a group, so we get to hear other people's intentions. It's very inspiring. It's a really great community space. So if you'd like to join us for that, you can head over to Patreon, and the link is in the show notes. We had a lot to say about Quiet on Set, and I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts about it too. So I'm very excited to announce that I will be doing a patron-only live stream on April 13th. And yes, even if you are a free patron, you will be able to join. We'll talk more about this episode of the podcast, and if you have questions about the astrology of Quiet on Set or thoughts that you want to share, we hope you'll join us there. If you're not already a free member of the Patreon, why not? You're missing out on all kinds of cool stuff, on updates, on free live streams like this, and more. So head over to the link in the show notes and get in there. Get on it. This episode was produced by Lori Rivers and brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.